For most of the globe, renewable energy has become a critical part of the energy mix, even overtaking fossil fuels and leading parts of Europe to produce so much energy that prices go negative. In Africa, solar is leading the way, with solar power generation capacity in Southern Africa of 6,652 megawatts, closely followed by Northern Africa at 3,392 megawatts, Eastern Africa at 767 megawatts, and Western Africa at 763 megawatts. As we can see, Western Africa and Eastern Africa have a long way to go. As Nigeria attempts to generate the power it needs for industrialization, we look at the role that renewable energy and renewable technologies are playing in powering modern Nigeria.
Hello and welcome to Tech into the Future, where we talk about everything that's happening in technology and how it affects you. My name is Ngozi Madweke-Dozier. I look after Android partnerships for West Africa at Google.
My name is Tomiwa Adekomo. I'm the CEO of Tech Cabal, a digital publication that's been covering African tech for the last decade. Alongside Ngozi, I'll be your guide into the world of tech in Nigeria, Africa, and the world.
Welcome back to Tech into the Future. Our focus today is on Nigeria's renewable energy sector, the progress made and what is still to come. Today's guest is the current Business Development Director for West Africa at Shell Foundation. He was the Senior Investment Associate at All On between the years 2018 and 2022, where he led an investment team focused on providing access to finance entrepreneurs working on clean energy access solutions across Nigeria. Welcome to the show, Goziam.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Excellent. So it's good to have you.
Yeah.
I want to dive in right at the top, which is, from your perspective, what's the state of renewable energy in Nigeria specifically?
Still nascent, but there's been a lot of progress. I think that the industry has grown organically from basically providing access to energy for people who are underserved. And that's really where it's been started from. So a lot of off-grid communities where the mini-grid space has developed solutions for. And then more recently, you have residential solar that's now become almost cost competitive to grid electricity because of the subsidies. But I think that the space has evolved as an answer to a problem, which is basically electricity for Nigerians. And evolving now into the future is really going to be focusing on electricity for productivity and focusing on productivity for segments and making real impact.
Fantastic. So the Shell Foundation has been given marginalized communities access to clean energy and enabling them to make a livelihood over the last 2 decades. Can you share with us a few of the projects you have found most interesting? At
Shell Foundation, we're really focused on enabling people to increase their incomes and earn a living income while reducing emissions. And these people are smallholder farmers, are micro-entrepreneurs, solar irrigation into their network of farmers to basically provide access to clean irrigation and productive use energy technologies, including cold storage and including processing technology. Those are some of the things that we've done over the last few years. But we've basically been focused on building the ecosystem, building the companies, and building the enabling environment for the sector to thrive.
Do you have a sense of what percentage of our power consumption right now comes from renewables?
Not a lot.
Not a lot.
Not a lot. And that's one of the things we're trying to change. But it's not really changing for the sake of changing it or focusing on technology or clean energy as a mix, as a part of our power mix. But it's really what clean energy can enable, and it's really what the technologies can enable. Clean energy, if you think about it as an off-grid energy technology, can reach marginalized communities, can provide them with steady power that can enable them to transition from below a living income to above a living income by focusing on productivity and focusing on the kind of productive activity that they use in their use in their communities. And that's really where I think the industry has focused on, is providing an alternative to expensive sort of grid extension by providing people with power where they need it and where they are right now. I think that's probably where it focuses on over the next few years.
So comparatively, South Africa and Egypt are currently leading the pack in the Africa scene when it comes to renewable energy. What systems would you like to see put in place to accelerate the growth of the renewable energy sector in Nigeria?
I think the first is building local capacity. It's building local manufacturing capacity. It's building local skills and technicians. One of the things I personally love about this industry is that it has a lot of the jobs of the future. The sort of clean energy movement isn't just about changing technology or being greener, but it's really somewhere where a lot of people can get jobs and build skills. And I think that's one of the most exciting things for me about the sector. So definitely putting in place an enabling environment that focuses on the skills, that focuses on the talent and the knowledge ecosystem to support that industry, building local manufacturing capacity as well, and ultimately affordability as well. That's a sort of a key challenge for a lot of customers or consumers of electricity generally, but also of clean energy. As technologies continue to evolve, if you look at battery technology, it's evolved dramatically. Solar panels have reduced in price over 95% over the last 20 years. As the technology costs continue to reduce, we have more affordable technologies. But I think affordability and financing for consumers is also a big area that we can improve on.
And for all intents and purposes, by the time we've, if we've created an enabling environment for capacity building and for manufacturing, then there'll be local manufacturing that should theoretically solve for affordability.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, yeah.
Theoretically. Theoretically.
I mean, look, let me ask you a question just kind of around that. Who are the various players and what do they need to do for this? Because you've talked about local manufacturing, you've talked about bringing the prices down. So what role does government have in this versus what role do foundations like Shell Foundation have in this versus startups and sort of manufacturers? So what do the various people need to do in that space? Yeah.
That's a great question. I think, first of all, innovation is where it all starts, right? So there's a place for startups, there's a place for innovation. From the supply side, what are the technologies that are coming to the market? What are the different business models that are coming to the market? There's a place for startup innovation, and that's a very important piece of this puzzle. Government provides the enabling environment. Tariffs on imports, for components are currently really high. Looking at driving down the cost of imports, driving down, providing incentives for local manufacturing, providing incentives for, component assembly and things like that can actually also go a long way. So I think that's where the government comes in, is providing the mix of incentives, both fiscal, to encourage investment in the space. There's a space for donors as well. Donors have really been very pivotal in taking early risk and de-risking some of the technologies that have come to market. And that's what we've done, for the last 20 years. But there's also a space for scale. And scale comes from large corporations. Scale comes from finding product market fit. Scale comes from financing solutions that make technologies more affordable for people. And scale comes from working through networks that serve the customers, that we're trying to serve, at scale, and working with them to onboard these technologies into the hands of customers, as many as possible, to enable them to be more productive and to earn, a living income. I think that's sort of the different players in there.
Apologies, I'll just jump in with one related question, which is, you've talked about sort of the need to do more renewable energy for productivity. But you've also talked about reaching marginalized communities. Now, our productivity is generally higher in urban areas, is generally higher in industrialized areas. And so kind of the energy you need for industrialization, for heavy manufacturing, for whatever it is a bit different than sort of the needs in terms of rural areas. And it can be for productivity in that you then enable them to farm better or to irrigate their farms. But it does feel like those are two different directions, which feels more urgent and more important, because for a country like Nigeria, on our industrialization drive, you need lots and lots of cheap power. And of course, sort of traditional power has become more expensive, of late. And so where would you say like the energy really needs to be? Is it in the remote areas? Is it in rural areas? Or is it, in heavy industrialized manufacturing areas, basically? Yeah.
My answer is both.
I mean,
It's definitely both.
I should have preempted that. No, you can't say both.
But here's the thing, right? Nigeria is experiencing like 47% food inflation right now, right? Reducing post-harvest loss can extend the shelf life of foods, can extend how much food goes to market, can impact the price of food. Something like cold storage, for example, solar cold storage is a technology that goes from innovation, small startups like Coolbox, like Churchill, who are innovating in the marketplace, getting those into the hands of farmers, getting them through a business model that works to the hands of farmers, so that they can be productive. That's an example of productivity at this micro level, for example. Something like a solar water pump, for example, can increase yields for something like rice by 25 to 30%. The more produce in the market, the lower prices are. We have a lot of issues that we're solving as a country, as people generally, but we're not like pushing technology. I think that's what I tried to explain earlier. We are focusing on productivity, both for urban factories and heavy industries. That's not what we do at Shell Foundation. We focus on the world's poor, who are earning below a living income, who have some sort of productive activity that clean energy can enable to transition them into a living income. And that's things like, increasing yields for farmers, reducing post-harvest loss for farmers, providing access to cold storage for micro entrepreneurs who are retailers and mom and pop shops. It's clean energy vehicles for urban transporters, two-wheeler drivers and three-wheeler drivers in urban areas as well, to enable them, have access to something that they can use to make more money, and also reduce emissions. That's where we focus. But there's definitely, space for both if we are going to move forward as a country into a clean energy future.
Okay, so taking a step back from your current role and just talking about the industry at large, the electricity generated from solar power in Nigeria between 2012 and 2022 grew from 20 gigawatt hours to 50 gigawatt hours. Is this significant? Like, is the growth significant? And if not, what significant contribution, or what do we need to be generating for there to be significant contribution to the national power grid?
You're talking about a lot of mini grids, for example, that are being built in communities, rural communities mostly, that previously didn't have access to grid power because it was just too expensive to extend the grid there. So things like subsidy programs, result-based financing that's been available in the sector have been some of the things that have spurred that increased capacity, that generation capacity. You also have a lot of companies that are focused on providing power to markets, for example, just to power commerce and provide power trade. That's part of the mix, and that has increased the availability of power, steady, reliable power to people who didn't have power previously. I think those are some of the examples of where renewable energy has played a role in bringing people into the energy ladder where they previously weren't. And then you talk about like commercial and industrial solar. That's probably part of the mix as well, where you have solar powering base loads for light manufacturing industries, factories across the country as well. So there's quite a number of different ways that clean energy is being deployed. I think the thing to focus on, and what I would like a lot of people to focus on, both in like building new businesses, is around who is having access to power and what they are able to use this power for, right? And ultimately, the goal is to make the country more productive using whatever technology works.
Let me ask you a bit of a forecasting question, which is sort of how much power stays off-grid and becomes off-grid solar and off-grid sort of energy versus gets contributed to the main grid. There's a national grid, and for the longest time, one of the things that's been the challenge is national grid sort of sufficient to power the nation? Does it have the distribution? Is there enough power being generated and put on it? But a lot of renewable energy solutions just end up being off-grid. Whether from a Shell or an all-on perspective or just from a personal perspective, do you have a view of what the future looks like? Is it people contributing to the national grid, or do we end up with a patchwork of off-grid and on-grid solutions? Yeah. And if you're saying patchwork, is that a good thing, or is it ideal for us to have a strong national grid, or is it just the reality that microgrids and sort of off-grid solutions are the future of energy in Africa and Nigeria specifically?
Nigeria is a very unique country where I can answer that question.
All right, let's answer it for Nigeria.
We currently have a patchwork.
Yes.
For every house that has a generator,
Fair enough.
Yes.
that powers their house, we have a patchwork of grid and off-grid energy, right? And solar.
So if we're evolving to a better place, what does that better place look like?
The better place is definitely a mixture. I think it's a patchwork. So if you look at like mini grids, take mini grid technology for example, started out as completely off-grid, standalone systems, and now the mini grid industry is also evolving into interconnected mini grids, which is basically a mix of a mini grid inside a distribution company's network, where the mini grid and the distribution company have a tariff sharing fee, but basically this provides additional power into that network, right? So we have a number of pilots across Nigeria for interconnected mini grids currently. That's one way that the industry evolves, right? Because now you're not competing for customers or forced to go off grid. You're really providing a service that distribution companies need, which is basically providing power generation capacity that they can wheel out to their customers. That's one way. I do think that for as long as grid extension remains expensive, there is a space for mini grid technology for communities who don't have power. There's also a space for standalone, productive activity like a standalone, processing center, a standalone mill, right? And so you think about it, I think that the best case scenario is that we increase the amount of generation, outside of the grid. We extend the grid in a way that allows for collaboration and not competition for the different developers and service models that reach customers. And most importantly, we provide power to people who need power in order to get them to be more productive in whatever way that happens. That's the most important thing that you can think about when you think about power, is what it's used for, which is productive activity, which is getting Nigeria productive, which is increasing the GDP of people who are usually overlooked when we think about productivity here.
Okay.
Interesting. So now back to the Shell Foundation. The Shell Foundation supports early stage startups creating renewable and clean energy solutions. But how are founders getting access to this support?
Throughout our programs, we like I said, we focus on startups, supply, so innovation. We have focused on innovation. A lot of the companies within the space have basically provided or gotten first capital from Shell Foundation. We'll continue to do that. The work of startups, of technology innovators is completely important to the kind of technologies that come to market that reduce costs, that enable people to increase their incomes, and that reduce emissions. So founders get capital, from us in a number of different ways, directly from us, where we directly invest. also through funds that we invest in, and managers that we invest in as well. We do a lot of market building programs, and we have done over the last few years. Going forward, one of the things that's most important to us is scaling technologies, and so scaling the supply of technologies.
You've talked about the price of solar sort of coming kind of parallel to the price of sort of on-grid power of late. If I'm a person with my own house, if I'm a small business, what should be my starting point with renewable energy at the moment? And should I be looking for it? Should I be chasing it? Should I be chasing the solutions, or should I? Yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
I think you should. I'm not preaching for renewable, energy. I personally think whatever works for you.
Works.
However, there are health benefits to reduced emissions. There are productivity benefits to more reliable, power that are just clear to see. So I think definitely looking at solar, looking at a mix for household use. There are many financing options as well currently, so it's no longer this expensive thing. Now there are financing options. There are companies that provide financing options on plans. There are banks that provide financing for solar currently today in Nigeria. And so it's the entry point has become lower to a point where it's more accessible as a technology, but the benefits are very clear. So it's something that I push for. I recently have just convinced my parents to get a system in their house. It wasn't an easy conversation, so I understand that there is a bit of communication that definitely needs to happen around the technologies and the benefits and what they do. But most importantly is providing reliable power where it's needed, and enabling productivity, enabling people to get things done and be productive. That's the message.
Okay, so last question. Aside from the renewable energy, let's talk about other emerging clean tech trends like electric vehicles, battery recycling, carbon capture, and low carbon construction. Which of these trends would you like to see more people focused on in Africa or in Nigeria, and why?
Definitely all of the above, to be honest. Carbon capture, just because I think that that's a way that the industry and ecosystem can sustainably finance itself. Ultimately, we're providing power, reducing emissions as well. And if that's a way to finance the scale of this technology, then I think tapping into global carbon markets is a way to make business models more effective in the space. Clean energy, or electric vehicles, just because they are a way to provide mobility in a way that is actually becoming even more affordable and cheaper compared to ICE alternatives, and will continue to be more competitive. And if we're going to position ourselves and position our economy for the future, it's definitely something that we should be investing in today.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us today, Goziem. It's been a fascinating conversation, and we look forward to having you in the future to talk a little bit more about, hopefully, stronger progress on this front across the country.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Don't go anywhere. This is Tech into the Future on Arise News.
Welcome back to Tech into the Future, where we just had an interview with Festus Goziem Okubo, who is the Business Development Director for West Africa at Shell Foundation. Tell me, what were your thoughts?
I thought it was really interesting to see the progress that we've made on renewable energy in both sort of providing power for residences and then businesses. I really thought that the focus on productivity in rural areas was a really interesting one.
Yes.
So when we talk about sort of, he tied it into our 47% food inflation.
Yes.
And so it's interesting to think about the fact that, look, we can apply these technologies to reduce food losses. We could apply it to sort of improve the productivity in rural areas. And that's, I mean, it's when we talk about poverty in Nigeria, when we talk about sort of like challenges in Nigeria, rural productivity is definitely a really big one. And so it's not the most obvious application of renewable technology. I think we normally think about it from an industrialization perspective, but it is obviously a critical place that they're playing in. Yeah.
So I think also, naturally as human beings, I think we're also very selfish. You're thinking about it, well, I'm thinking about it for my personal use, right? By the time, Band A, do you understand? By the time Band A is, 226 Naira, and there's a strike, an NLC strike on power, and so you're now on diesel the entire time. I'm thinking, thank God for solar. Right, because just on a personal level, and that's the thing, is like you think about it on a unit by unit, but the truth of the matter is that it does help, because what that does is that it preserves disposable income, right? Because I'm managing my power in my unit, and so are so many other people. And I've heard this conversation being had, especially in this time, about generating their own power outside of our regular generators. And the good thing about it is that, indeed, affordability is a challenge, even for those that are the well-off, because your initial investment in trying to solarize anything, as an example, is high. But then, the carbon capture at the end of the day. So you are generating power, and you are you're not also generating fuels, right? No emissions.
Yeah. No, I think. Definitely a lot of really interesting things there. I think the conversation with the grid was fascinating. And so for the longest time, we've kind of been wedded to the idea of a national grid and the importance of sort of maintaining and strengthening the national grid. I think renewable solutions have definitely made the idea of the mini grids a lot more palatable, and the idea that you can power an estate, you can power a small industrial area, you can power a small processing plant, and it is in ways that are good for the environment versus everything being diesel driven is definitely sort of catching on a lot faster. I think also from a retail perspective is what you've mentioned, which is the idea that, look, I can reduce my own energy costs by sort of taking this. It will be interesting as we evolve to see what, by the time enough people take themselves fully off grid, what that then does to the ability to the viability of the grid in smaller areas. Although at the moment we're generating so little power relative to our needs that I think we're probably a long way from that particular place.
The truth of the matter is that, again, this is no different from a lot of the other verticals, right, in Nigeria, is that by the time we start, by the time individuals or the private sector start providing solutions, then what that does, for better or for worse, is that it lessens the pressure on the government, right? And so not the best alternative, but at least an alternative that is workable and that can actually bring more people to. It's more inclusive, right? Because of its distribution power.
Yeah, I think we can close on the role of government in this, which is sort of renewables are definitely taking off a lot of pressure on the system, and they are producing new solutions for powering various communities. And so I think it's critical, as he's mentioned, reducing the tariffs on importing components.
Yes.
So not on finished products, but on the components of renewable energy, creating incentives for innovative power solutions. And so I think that's critical. I'd like to see that.
Right. And then also having investors in the ecosystem in general.
Yeah.
Right?
Excellent. Thank you for joining us today on Tech into the Future. My name is Tomiwa Ladikomo.
And I am Ngozi Madueke-Dozie. Join us next time as we take you into the business and impact of technology in Africa, how it's changing the world around you and how it's changing your world. Stay tuned to Arise News.